So tonight we're going to be talking about strategies for funding big budget feature films. Specifically, we're talking about films between 500K and $5 million. The reason that I set the breakpoint between 500K and $5 million is I don't think there's very many people who can fund a $500,000 film without resorting to working with investment or investors and or lenders. And I also don't think that most people who are producing independent films at the moment are really going above $5 million without resorting to working with studios or other producers putting together co-productions in order to produce the project. So 500K to $5 million, I sort of see as being the kind of film that an independent filmmaker would choose to put together sort of on their own. It's sort of from the smallest to the largest. We do have another workshop where we talk about how to produce lower cost films. 10K to 100K is sort of the ballpark. And there's a no man's land between 100K and 500K. If you get really good at producing 100K films, you'll see the budget start creeping up as you do bigger and bigger projects until you reach the point where you really are relying significantly on both loans and investors to bring the project together. When you're producing little projects from 10K to 100K, a lot of times you're funding those projects on your own, or you're working with money from friends and family that they don't expect to get paid back. It's a different kind of producing. It's a lot easier, it's a lot faster, and it can be very profitable. People do routinely sell projects that they've produced for 10K, 20K, 100K. They do find a way to market them and earn money off of them. When you're moving up into the 500K to $5 million ballpark, you're talking about creating something that's going to take longer to produce, but hopefully we'll be producing significantly more revenue in the future. And, sometimes people put together a film and it earns money for year after year after year, decade after decade after decade. And sometimes films that are produced in this budget level go on to be franchise films. Paranormal Activity started out as like a very low cost film, 14K or 17K film, but it's now gone on to be $100 million franchise. Each new version of Paranormal Activities might cost $100,000, and there's certainly a lot of films in the between $1 million and $5 million that were produced for that amount of money that went on to make significantly more revenue after that. So sometimes something you choose to produce for low cost can actually turn out to generate a lot of money. And a lot of times when you're producing films in the 500K to $5 million ballpark, that's exactly what you want to have happen. So the first thing I want to start with, which I always start with, and which is particularly important when we're talking about funding, is I'm not an attorney. I'm not a securities attorney. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax advisor. And yet, in order to talk about producing films at this budget level, you have to talk about all of those kinds of issues. I am specifically telling you that you should not rely on the information I give you here as legal advice or accounting advice or tax advice, etc. And I am specifically telling you that in order to produce films at this budget level, you absolutely, positively will be working with lawyers, CPAs, tax attorneys, banks, investors, etc. You will be working with those folks, and you will also be working with high value or higher value cast, crew, agents, and managers. So nothing in this workshop should be taken as legal or financial advice or telling you that you can sort of shoot this kind of project guerrilla or anything remotely like that. In fact, this workshop is specifically designed to explain why you need that professional advice and how failure to get it can cost you time and money and involve you in being sued or criminal prosecution if you really go wild. As the budget for your film goes up, you're going to work with people who really do expect to be paid and whose time, money, and reputation are very valuable to them and valuable to the people that work with them. So you have to do things by the book. At this budget level, people care. The methods and strategies and options addressed in this set of materials represents my opinions. If you take a look at the resources that come with this particular workshop, you'll see that I've interviewed a huge number of people, or quite a number of people, including attorneys, talking about business of production. We have Adrian Ward's interview where he talks about, as a bank a loan manager specifically for films, he talks about what's involved in getting a loan to help fund a feature film. We have conversations with producers, reps, etc. So the supporting documentation for this particular workshop is very important, and it's specifically important for people who will be looking for funding. This workshop is meant to be a starting point resource for supporting your career as a producer, and specifically to give you a framework that helps you understand the conversations that you're going to be having with people that provide funding. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about what do you need funding for. So producing films at this budget level is going to require you to get outside funding. It's just going to be the case. Not all of your funding is going to come from other people. Some of it you're going to actually have to put up for yourself, but you're going to need money for initial meetings, to pay for research that you have to do, consulting with lawyers and you know, including intellectual property or entertainment lawyers and securities attorneys. You're going to need money to fund your initial go/no-go development costs. This is the part at the beginning of the development process where you take a look at your script, you option it or buy it or find a way to acquire it, and then get notes on it, professional notes that tell you whether or not professional readers think that the project is good, and they make suggestions, and you may revise the script to make it so the film is better or the script is better. And the reason that you do that is because if you don't, when you send your script to agents and managers and directors, and they send it out to readers and the bad comments come back, your script gets rejected, and you don't even know why it's getting rejected because you never sent it out to professional readers. You also need money to pay for budgets and shooting schedules and day out of days, which are created by a line producer. And it's important that it's a line producer and not a UPM. They're not the same. There's an interview in the set of resources with a line producer, and she talks specifically about the differences between a UPM and a line producer. You're also going to be using your funding to pay for your development costs. You should have 20% of the money that you for the budget for your project sort of in your pocket before you at the very beginning of the process, or after you get to the go no go decision. The first 20% is very important, and you need that to set up your company, like the LLC, or what theoretically you could also use a C corporation. You want to attach key cast and key crew and the producer's rep, and you need to set up the investment structures. We're going to talk about what those might be, and also to do the marketing and promotion, to create the materials that you're going to need to raise money from investors, and also that you're going to give to the producer's rep to go out and get pre-sales from distributors, because those pre-sales are you're going to be used to help your funding as well. You also need money to handle pre-production, which is the acquisition of locations, the rest of the cast and crew that you don't hire in the development process. Helps you hire equipment and to help you get more pre-sales and to help you raise additional investment. Once you're well into production, you're going to need it for shooting. You're going to need it for dailies and initial editing. And then you're also going to need it for the ongoing pre-sales operations, because from this time that you enter development and you know that you're going to produce the project all the way through the end of the project and editing, you are still going to be looking for pre-sales. You try to sell the project before it's finished, and you better have success doing that especially when you're working at the $5 million level. In post-production, you're going to need funding to pay for creating the deliverables that the distributors want. Remember that when you produce your content, you have to make sure that it meets all the requirements for commercial film production. And that means, crazy things like everything is shot at the same resolution, everything is shot at the same frame rate, everything is color corrected, all of your audio tracks are correct. You haven't recorded dialogue on the same track that you've recorded music, and none of them are on the same track with sound effects, and everything is legally licensed. You're also going to be need funding to go into initial monetization. And by that I mean, once your film has actually been finished and you send it's all out at the distributors, at some point money's going to start coming back in. Usually you're going to have a collection account management agreement. Not always. If you're smart, you will. A collection account management company will help take all the money in, and they will dish it all out to the people that it's supposed to go to in exactly the right order. Most smart investors and banks are going to require you to have a collection account management uh, account, collection account management service and account that basically makes sure that when money comes in, all the revenue goes into a central bank account and it all gets paid out. And there's a couple of reasons why you want that. One of the reasons is because it makes it so you don't have to keep your company film accountant on board trying to handle that processing. Two, the collection account management company also handles sending out people's tax documentations, letting them know how much each person was paid, which is very important. And the third thing it does is it allows you to start paying attention to working on your next project. If you're spending all of your time keeping track of the money coming in and making sure everybody's checks goes out, how are you going to make money producing another film? And if you produce one film, you should automatically, generally speaking, most people who are successful produce one film. And as that film gets into the marketplace, they roll on to doing the next film. So they get momentum in their career. So you're going to need funding. And these are all of the kinds of things that you're going to need it for. So when you're producing a project at the 10K to 100K level, by and large, you're going to provide all of your own funding. You may have friends or family that give you money. They don't expect to get paid back. It's just maybe sometimes crazy people will use credit cards, which is a possible thing to do. Sometimes they find somebody who's willing to buy the project and they produce it on commission. Basically, you find a distributor or somebody else who says, yeah, if you produce that documentary, I'll give you 250K for it. And when they write a contract that says that, you can wander it off to somebody that does factoring, and they'll give you money for producing that particular project. So at the low cost production level, 10K to 100K, you're pretty much funding it yourself. When you're producing a project at this budget level, you're going to use some or all of these resources. The first thing is you are going to put up a certain amount of personal cash, and you're going to probably end up using your own credit if you happen to have credit, or you're going to sell something, maybe sometimes, and I don't recommend this by any means or stretch of the imagination. They liquidate retirement accounts, etc. So I don't recommend that you do that. You should not do that. We'll talk more about why. But everybody puts in a little bit of money at the beginning of producing a film because you probably are going to want to have meetings with the writer, and you're going to have to take them out for coffee. You're probably going to want to pay once you get a copy of a screenplay. You're probably going to want to talk to a attorney about how you might go through the process of acquiring it, whether it's via an option agreement or a purchase agreement. You may want to come up with a little bit of cash to pay from your own personal pocket to pay for the option agreement. It's possible you're going to definitely want to send out the project to professional readers. It's relatively cheap to do that. You can send it out to 5 of them for like $300 or $500. So, if you're using WeScreenplay or one of the other resources that we've talked about, those kinds of expenses, they're just part and parcel of doing business. You are going to have to get about 20% of your budget for go, no go assessment and setting up initial attachments and setting up your company, and perhaps setting up the documents that you need to raise money from investment. So if you're producing, for example, $1 million project, you're going to have about $200,000. You have to find about $200,000 because attaching all the pieces that you need to build your project is probably going to cost you about that much. You need the money acquiring the screenplay or having, maybe getting an option agreement isn't necessarily that expensive. And it's really not terribly expensive to hire a line producer to create the budget shooting schedule, and day out of days. That might be, $5,000 to pay that guy to do that. So you might spend, five or $10,000 on your own, and then you start getting to the point where you start needing the real money, because that's when you start moving into the point where you have to start attaching actors and key cast and key crew and so forth. At that point, it's likely that you do start reaching out to investors. And in order to reach out to investors, you actually have to set up your company. You have to actually work with an attorney to create the documents required to reach out to investors. And you have to spend time contacting investors via the investment platforms. This might be something like WeFunder or Slated. And we do have an interview in the set of resources where you can learn more about Slated, which is a platform where people raise money from investors. And in the Reg CF documents, it talks about, I think, WeFunder and a couple of other investment platforms, Seed Invest and so forth. So usually in this process, you end up with an investor coming on board relatively early to help you with that first 20% of your investment. And that person trusts you more than most other people. They're buying into the project relatively early, and they know they're taking a risk, but they think it's a good risk. And with the money that they give you, you do the rest of the attachments you need to complete the rest of your funding, which we'll talk about in the next few pages. You also are going to be working with lenders. And you use lenders generally speaking, for two purposes. Banks usually will give you money if you have done pre-sales. So let's say that I make a deal with Netflix. I've decided that I'm going to produce a project for $2 million. And I go to Netflix, or I go to some other streaming service, and they go, well, we really like that project. It's in English, so we're going to go ahead and buy it for the US and Canada. And we're willing to give you $500,000 for the rights. And they write a contract that says, if you complete this project to the specification, we will give you a minimum guarantee of this amount of money. You can take that to a bank, and they will go, and an entertainment bank will lend against that amount of money. And they may give you 80% or 90%, depends on, how confident they are, because you have a piece of paper that says somebody's going to pay you for the project when it's done. Now, the important thing to understand is that lenders have a lot of requirements. It's not just that piece of paper. There's other stuff that they're going to want to see as well. But most people who are funding projects at this budget level do end up working with the bank. They do end up getting pre-sales. They do end up getting minimum guarantees from the people who want to license their work, and they do it before the funding is in place. The lenders will also give you money based on government incentives. So let's say that you want to go shoot you want to shoot your film, and you have a choice of shooting it here in California or shooting it in New Mexico, which gives you 25% rebate, cash rebate, based on the amount of money that you actually spend in that particular state. That means that if it's a $5 million project, in theory, you could get up to $1 million back, in theory. The same is true. Georgia has a larger rebate. The New Orleans has a rebate. And so there's ways across the United States. Many states have different rebate programs. They all have limits. They all have sets of rules. And the way that usually what happens is, as you're building your project, you have your line producer, who hopefully has shot in that state and gotten rebates before. You have your line producer bring your project to the state and say, hey, we'd like to shoot here. We want to be eligible for the incentive program. And as you start building your project and you get to the point where you say, yes, we're gonna start shooting in 2 months, they give you a letter that says, yes, you're eligible for the rebate, and you can take that to a lender, and they'll say, okay, we'll deposit the money in your account based upon this series of conditions on this particular date. So they tell you when the money's going to come in. So lenders are definitely part of everybody's solution, almost everybody's solution that's working at a high budget level for funding films. It's also possible to raise money and to get support from product placement. Now, it's important to understand that most of the time when you're getting support from product placement, which is to say that you have a film and you say, hey, I'll feature your business or your product in my film, and in return, you'll give me some sort of benefit. Most of the time, the benefit that you're going to get is going to be the use of the product or the service or the location. So if, let's say that you want to shoot your film and it's got 3 days that you're spending in a diner, or maybe 5 days you're spending in a diner. It could be the case that you go to a place like Georgia and you talk to 20 diners or 30 diners and you find somebody who says, yeah, feature my diner and I'll let you shoot at night. And you say, okay. So if you had to buy that diner fully kitted out exactly the way a real diner is, but plus all of the parking and everything that goes with it, it might be the case that you're spending $3,000 or $5,000 a day. So the fact that that particular location is offering you the use of the facility or its location, you know, for 5 days, that means that they're giving you $25,000, and a useful $25,000 too, because it doesn't just save you time, it also saves you um, money. It saves you the time and money required to set up a diner that looks as good as the one that they have. So most product placement is in kind and reduces the cost of your project. It reduces the amount of money that you need. Sometimes it is possible to get cash for your project as when you're working on a project and somebody really, really, really wants to be featured in your film, and it's going to be newsworthy, the fact that they are featured in your film. You can say, hey, look, you've got a 3D hologram solution here. There's like 3 or 4 other 3D hologram solutions, and I would really very much like to feature yours. I think it's the very best one, but um, and you've offered to let me use it for free, but I'd like you to help get the film produced by paying me, you know, $200,000 or $300,000. And they may say, well, you're out of your mind. You know, we're not going to do that. And you go, but the thing is, I'm going to approach all three of these companies that have competing projects, and I'm going to be doing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of marketing for this particular project, and I will be showcasing whichever 3D hologram company I work with. And so really you'll be getting that benefit in advertising and marketing. It's worth it. You spend that much money on commercials, you spend that much money on national advertising, a single page in a national magazine. Isn't it worth it to just go ahead and help me out? And if you're a good deal maker, a lot of times you can get them to say yes, and depending upon what your project is and how high value it is. Finally, another way for you to generate funding for your project is merchandising through books and other media. And the interesting thing is you can do merchandising to generate revenue after your film is finished, right? Or you can use it to generate revenue for your film before your film is finished. If you think about it, how many times, if you watch a Disney film, how many times have you left the Disney film and then 2 days later or for Christmas, you're spending $100 or $200 on a blanket, that has Pocahontas on it, or uh, like a whole bedroom set that has a Little Mermaid theme, right? It's very common that merchandising generates revenue for film production companies and for people that produce media. It's people do that all day, every day. It is also possible to write a book and make the book very, very popular, which is very cost effective to do, especially if theoretically you could even produce a series of books. And it's very easy to make the book popular. Books are very cheap, very easy, very fast. They're one of the easiest kinds of products for people to profitably produce. And if you're a filmmaker, it's the amount of hassle it is to produce a book is so much less, and it's all so much faster and so much less stressful than producing a movie. You might as well go ahead and produce the book first. So you can go ahead and produce the book, you can do the marketing for it, and then you can put actually on the cover, soon to be a major motion picture. You can, the sales of the book generates revenue, and actually the sale of a book a lot of times generates as much money per copy sold as selling a film. How much do you spend on books? If you buy an ebook, aren't you spending $4.99? If you buy a film, aren't you spending $4.99 or less really for the film because you're buying it on a streaming service? So if you think about it, books are more profitable. You get your money, it can come directly to you. You make more per sale, and um, if you sell, there's a variety of different ways for you to sell your book, and you can make it so that you actually get people's email address, which will make it easier for you to market the film once it's available. So merchandising is a real and very important way for you to make money to fund your projects. You can, and to generate um, uh, profit from your projects. It's people, for some reason in the film industry, have a real tendency to ignore it as an option, except for the ones who make lots of money. The ones who make lots of money think merchandising first. There's not an accident that George Lucas made most of his money from merchandising and not from Star Wars. He made money. The fact that he made so much money from merchandising led him pretty much abandon having to work with major studios after he did Star Wars, because even though 20th Century Fox basically owned the picture and all of the revenues from it, he owned all of the merchandising. So all those little dolls that he generated, that Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and all the toys, he made all that money. So he made quite a lot of revenue from merchandising, and it's something that you should think about as you're building your projects. Now, let's talk about personal cash, credit, and liquidated investments, and how they factor into your raising money for your project. A lot of producers, especially, take savings, or if they have savings, there's a million stories about a lot of independent producers who've taken their savings and plowed it into a film. There's also a lot of stories about those people losing all of that money. It's not necessarily one of the reasons I tell people to produce a 10K to 100K project first, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them, is because if you are having trouble making 10K or 20K or 30K or 40K movie make money, you're going to have trouble, just as much trouble, if not more, making a more expensive project and making that make money. So if you're going to burn up savings, I recommend you do it on a lower cost project, because the chance of you getting your money back and the chance that you're not going to get yourself into terrible debt is a lot better if you're doing a lower cost project than if you're doing a very expensive project. A lot of filmmakers do have jobs, especially when they're first starting out. They may be jobs in the industry, they may be jobs in real estate. A shocking number of people in real estate actually do films, I find. So it may be the case you've got a job that pays you extra money, so it gives you over the course of 2 or 3 years, you might have 20K or 30K or 50K or 100K that you set aside for speculative activity, and film's a good speculative activity. It could be the case that you're working in the entertainment industry, you do a particularly big project, and on that project you make $250,000 or $300,000 in a year, and you can either pay really, really high taxes, or you can go ahead and start and produce a film. So in that case, you're taking money, business income, and you're plowing it into another business venture. Could be that you're getting money from friends and family. That's always a risky business, but it is done from time to time. It could be that you've got contributions from people who have a particular interest in your project. I refer to those people as people who have an axe to grind. And I mean that not really in a pejorative sense, but if I like faith-based entertainment, or if I am, and it could be, you know, um, any religion, doesn't matter what religion it is, could be Hindu, who knows what it is. And you've got a project, whether it's in most cases, we're talking about feature films or narrative films. If you've got a particularly good depiction or an accurate depiction of a Hindu person, and it's something that a person who happens to have um, a significant interest in seeing good depictions of that particular kind of hero, then it may be the case that they actually give you the money effectively as a donation. They may just say, you know what, I don't need to make money on this. I, you know, I am tired of seeing uh, every single Hindu picture I watch depict forced marriages. You know, a lot of people that come from India don't even have any forced marriages at all, and yet it's the only thing that you ever see on TV. Or it could be the case that they don't like depictions of Muslims, and your project shows them in a better light. It could be the case that you're showing Christians in a different light. It could be the case that you're showing LGBTQ, etc., in a different light. The point is, some people who have an axe to grind or a point of view that they feel strongly about, they'll take a look at your project and they'll go, you know what? I don't need any money back from this. It's not an investment. I know you need money to put it together, and I'll go ahead and I'll give you money that you can use for this particular project. It's not a charity. It's not a donation. It's literally me just funding this particular project. There's rules about that. You'd have to talk to a lawyer, but I have seen several films funded by people who just had that kind of philanthropic interest. I mean, at least the development, the first 20%. It could be the case that you get contributions from folks who need credits. And um, I'm going to tread very gently here because this is a very hot hot topic, or hot. This can be a dangerous thing to talk about. For example, asking actors to pay for roles is considered very, very, very bad manners. But there are actors who are co-producers who say, look, I have particular kinds of projects and kinds of roles that I want to be seen in. And I produce things, I produce my own content all the time, and I will work as a co-producer on a project if I can play a particular role in that particular project. And it's always important to understand that whether an actor is working with you on a project as a producer or not, you still have to pay him at least the SAG minimum fees. I want to make sure that you understand that 99.9% of actors, if you tell them, look, you know, do you want to contribute to my film, or do you want to become an investor in my film, or do you want to be a producer on my film? Many of them will take great offense because they basically think that you're trying to get them to work for free, and that you're a rotten producer, and that you're trying to hire them too cheaply. But there are many actor producers, and many actor producers basically say, well, yeah, you know, I have a creative voice and I want to fund my own projects, and I will also do co-productions with producers that I like, and I will work for the minimum, and I will take a percentage of the back end. And in effect, that is very helpful to you as a producer because it reduces the cost of producing your project. So it could be the case that they actually help you come up with the 20%, but it can also be the case that they work for SAG minimums, and because they're established actor and they bring a lot of value to the project, the fact that they're working for less means that your budget costs go down. Sometimes people work that way with writers. Sometimes people find there's a variety of different people that get work on as co-producers throughout this town. So they do it because they're writers and they want to be writer producers. They do it because they are producers reps, and every so often they'll see a project that's so good that they're willing to discount their costs, or they're willing to actually even help come up with some investment for development costs, specifically because they like this project so much and they want a percentage of the back end. So sometimes you get contributions from people who need or want credits, or need or want a percentage of your deal because they think it's going to be a really good deal. Whenever you're building those people into your projects, you have to understand that you're losing a certain level of control, because there's nothing that can be more awkward than having an actor producer, or writer producer, or a producer's rep producer, or somebody who's working on the distribution side as a producer on your project, suddenly get very angry with you and decide that they're not going to do this key role that you need them to do, and because they don't like how the project's going, or because they don't trust you, because it can really gum up the whole project. It can take something that was really going very quickly and turn it into a complete train wreck. So I don't necessarily recommend seeking out this kind of support in the earliest days of the work that you're doing. But it is the case that as time goes by, people will say, look, can I be a co-producer on your project, and I'll charge you less if you let me. So you need to know that that is a thing that happens. It is possible to get donation-based crowdfunding from fans. Like you can go to set up something on Kickstarter or Indiegogo and raise $20,000 or $30,000 of the money you need there. That works when the property that you're deciding to produce already has an established fan base. So if you have a set of kids' mysteries and the thing that you're producing is a kids' cartoon, and the kids' mysteries books sell really, really well, it could be the case that you go to the author who you've licensed the project that the story that you're planning to produce, and you say, can you send out an email and let people know that they can go to this Kickstarter link and, they can give us money and we'll invite them to a party when the film is actually produced. So, and we'll also send them a copy of, we'll also invite them to watch the movie first, so that they'll be the first ones to see the particular project. It could be the case that you get $5 or $10 from 10,000 people, which will turn into $100,000 pretty quickly. That's one of the benefits of working with a intellectual property like a book that already has a huge number of fans associated with it. That's why you want to do that, is because it's easier for you to raise money from the fans both before and after production. And then finally, it could be the case that you have a screenplay. It could be you turn the screenplay into a book, and it could be the case that you actually market that book, or maybe even a series of books, and you use that merchandising money to raise the money for the personal cash that you need to start the process of producing a project. Now, let's talk for a few minutes about working with investors. We already talked about the fact that very, very early on in your project, usually after you sort of vetted the screenplay, and usually after you've paid for the budget and shooting schedule and day out of days and so forth, and maybe after you've paid for the film analytics that tell you what the financial forecast is for your particular project, somewhere around there, you're going to decide whether or not your project is going to go forward or not go forward. And at that point, you're probably going to need to work with an investor who is going to give you the 20% that you need to raise money from to actually raise money from other investors, and to attach key cast and key crew and so forth. In order to approach investors, you are going to have to work with a securities attorney. And there's several different ways to raise money from investors. There's a whole lot that you need to know about. And the securities attorney is the only person that you can really trust to provide that information. The most common question that people ask is, how do I even find investors? I don't even know where to meet investors. Well, the truth is that the state of California has licensed platforms or websites, basically, where investors are allowed to look at investments. One of them, for example, is called slated.com. If you were to go check out slated.com, you would see that it's a place where there's lots of films listed, and in order to set up an account as an investor on that site, you have to answer a bunch of questions, and you have to state that, yes, you're an accredited investor, and it tells you what that means, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those investment platforms are where you can actually meet with investors who have put money into other projects and who are interested in putting into projects. I mentioned also that Slated, last time I checked, had an executive producers program. And if you jump through a series of hoops, they would also sort of aggressively help you raise money from investors. So that's something to look at. Slated, last time I checked, was a Regulation D platform, which is to say that you had to do a Regulation D private placement. Over the decades, the most common way for filmmakers to raise money from investors, the most common mechanism was using a Regulation D offering. We talk about this in the documentation. There's a whole REGCF video that dives deep on this in the set of resources you have access to. But suffice to say that back in the 1930s, as you may recall, there was the stock market crash, and a lot of it was caused because a bunch of crazy people went around selling quote unquote investments to people, and a whole bunch of people got ineffective right? So Congress set up the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was going to be responsible for regulating all sort of investment in the country. And some people objected, and they said, look, if we are people who know each other, like we live in a little farm town, and we want to get 5 of us together to create a new mill, we should not have to go to Washington, D.C. to get permission for us to put investment into a particular project just because you're afraid of us getting taken. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to set up an exemption, a series of exemptions when we don't have to register, we don't have to deal with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the same kind of rules that IBM, huge companies have to follow when they're selling to huge numbers of people everywhere. We're just a bunch of people that know each other. We want to put together money for a project. So they created the Regulation D exemptions, and there's several of them. You can learn more about them by Googling Regulation D private placements. And the way that generally speaking works is that if we all know each other, one of us can say, hey, I'm going to put together Regulation D private placement. And in the old days, I could take it to my friends and I could have a disclosure document, which told them what risk they were taking and what the return, not what the return on investment would be, but what return, how money would be returned. Like it'd say, if you give me $100, I'm going to give you your $100 back. Plus I'm going to give you 20%. Plus I'm going to give you $50. 50% of every dollar after that. It explained the investment. And it also told people they were going to lose all their money. It told them every single risk, and it told them they were likely to lose all their money, etc. It was just a very clear disclosure document, and it might have a business plan attached that explained exactly what the business was going to do. So this document would be called a private placement memorandum. It's a memorandum that lists all of the information that is pertinent to the investment. And there would be a subscription agreement or something like that where you signed on the bottom line, said, yes, I want to put my money in. And there would be something where you attested to the fact that you were an accredited investor, which means that you made a certain amount of money per year, like $300,000 a year or whatever. But basically prove that you were competent to make this investment. So this Regulation D private placement is how most people had raised money for decades and decades and decades. And then during the Obama administration, they made it a little bit easier. One of the things that they did is they made it legal for websites to set up an investment platform where investors could go to look at different kinds of investments. The reason they did that is because the Kickstarter had been running for a while, and Indiegogo had been running for a while. And people said, look, you can go onto these stupid platforms and you can put a project up and then people can give you money for nothing. Why can't we have a platform just like that where people can make investments? I mean, it's kind of the same thing, right? One just gives you money back. And so the Regulation D platforms were sort of born. Subsequently, during that same time period, they started talking about doing something that allowed people to make investments in something that was very much like crowdfunding. And that created something called Regulation CF. Regulation CF is basically, if you look at wefunder.com, you can go up there and you can see that each investment has a page, and on the page it has a disclosure document that lists the same thing that would you're going to lose all your money, and this is how we plan to spend your money, and this is how this is how the investment works, and what percentage you're going to get back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it usually has like a little video. It has what amounts to basic business plan that explains the investment. So they set up these Regulation CF websites, and you don't have to be an accredited investor to put money into those kinds of investments. You could be, but you don't have to be. So Regulation CF, um, they ran it for a while, and this year you can now raise, as a filmmaker, you can raise up to $5 million, and there's no limit. It used to be there was a limit to how much a single investor can put in. Now a single investor can put in, as I understand it, I think, as much as they want. And you can also accept investment from as little as $100, as little as $100 per person. And there's all kinds of rules that govern this thing, and there's all kinds of rules that govern what you're allowed to say to people and how you're allowed to communicate with people. There's all kinds of rules. So you have to work with a securities attorney to do a Regulation CF investment to make sure that you're obeying the rules. But it is less expensive than doing a Regulation D, generally speaking, because Regulation D private placement has usually creating the PPM might cost $10,000 or $25,000, and it's less expensive to create the Regulation CF page, and to it's more formulaic, so it's less expensive. Is how it has been presented to me and is my understanding. So, and I don't, you have to, for your particular project, every project is different. That's why you have a securities attorney. So the other cool thing about Regulation CF investments is that you can run advertisements. So I can go onto Facebook and I can say, I'm doing a Christian movie based on the Prodigal Son starring George Clooney. And you can invest in that project by going here. And you can go to the WeFunder site, and it'll give you all the information about the project. You can click a button and you can put the investment. You can give the film, people can give you the money, right? So the ability to be able to run ads, to actually solicit investment using the internet, means there's a lot of people that have successfully raised money for projects using Regulation CF. And that solves the problem of how you meet investors. Now, it is always going to be a good idea for you to create a project that is established based upon a known intellectual property that people already like. It could be the case that you are creating a murder mystery set at the Indianapolis 500. It could be the case that you've got a love story set at Santa Anita track. It doesn't really matter. Like, picking something that has a fan base attached to it makes your project much easier to fund, and it also makes it sell better when it's produced. It's very, like, a lot of times when people are producing projects, they have this crazy idea. They take out some notion, which is probably, very important to them, and probably a really good thing generally, and probably really nice and wonderful, but it has no tie to the outside world, and thus has no existing fan base. So that means that in order for that producer to be successful raising money and producing the project and selling it is difficult, because nobody knows how to market it, because there isn't an existing fan base to market to. That's why filmmakers license popular books and get life rights from famous people to do their films about. Now, you're going to work with securities attorneys to accept investment 100% of the time. You are never going to do it alone. You are never going to take your business plan, show it to people, and have people write you checks. You are never going to do that, ever. You're going to vet investors before accepting investment. So if they're giving you money through the Regulation CF platform, then it's kind of the platform's job to make sure that they're vetted. The platform's job is to make sure that they're actually okay to give you money. But when you're taking money from other people through Regulation D and all kinds of other things, other kinds of investment, it is kind of your job to make sure that the people giving you money are able to, there are accredited investors. Also, there are a lot of scams where people pretend to be investors and then they make you jump through a bunch of hoops, like getting, there's a million different investment scams that involve people saying they're going to give you money, but then they never actually do. And you want to avoid those at all costs. And a securities attorney will warn you when somebody's a scammer. So that's another reason to actually work with securities attorneys. They protect you when somebody's acting outside the lines. they also make sure that you obey all of the rules. And that's true when you're doing a regulation CF campaign, because there are rules about what you're allowed to tell people, and what you're allowed to say to people in presentations and in meetings and so forth. Um, we talked briefly about Regulation D and Regulation CF. Some people, I don't think this is the least bit common in funding films, but it is very common when people are funding apps, and it's not impossible to use for anything, is my understanding, is convertible debt. And that's when somebody gives you a loan and then it converts into an investment at some point in the future. And when you're first raising money for the earliest days of putting your project together, in theory, somebody may say, look, I loan you $10,000 or $50,000 to help you get through the development process and do all the right attachments. But as soon as that portion's done and you're raising money from other investors, I want you to convert my loan into an investment. You'd have to work with an attorney to set that up, but it's a way that you can, I've seen people use that to accept money from somebody who wants to help support the project, and then um, and it skips them having to set up the Regulation CF or the Regulation D documentation at the very beginning. I can't recommend it because I'm not a securities attorney, but I've known people who've done it with apps routinely, and I have known people that have tried to do it with uh, films, and I can't recall whether or not it actually went forward. It didn't go forward. It didn't seem to be the least bit illegal, but you'd have to talk to an attorney about. It's important also to understand you do not want to just go buy a private placement memorandum or a business plan or something like this and then just change the information and make it about you and then start reaching out for investment. The reason you don't want to do that is because when you make mistakes raising money from investors, it may not be problems for you today. It can be problems for you in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, because the Securities and Exchange Commission expects you to obey all of the rules. And whenever an investor gets angry with you, perhaps because they don't think they got paid back the amount of money that they should, or the project crashes and the film never actually gets made, it could, if you haven't set up the investment documentation correctly, they can say that they've been defrauded. And that can involve you with um, both civil and criminal litigation. So you are going to want to make sure that you work with a Securities and Exchange, a securities attorney who understands the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission, because when you follow the rules, you're the one that's protected, not just your investors. Now, we talked about lenders previously. Entertainment banks are a special kind of bank that make loans just for films and for TV series. And the loans are almost never personally secured. So one of the nice things about raising money from a bank is that it's one of the, for a film, because it's a business loan, it's not personally secured. It's not like you're borrowing money for your house. Now, because it is not personally secured, they are going to make you jump through a huge number of hoops in order to ensure that they have the highest probability that they're going to get paid back. And in previous events, and recorded in the videos that you have access to, we talked about the development process that you go through in order to develop your projects. We talked about vetting the screenplay. We talked about working with getting the line producer on board to do the date of days and the budget and the shooting schedule. We talked about working with film analytics companies to do financial forecasts and to figure out which distributors distribute this particular kind of film. We talked about this whole set of things. Lenders care about that stuff. They really care about it. That's how they vet your film. So you're going to create a whole package full of documents for them that talks and that is based upon sort of that development process that you've gone through. So you're not going to go direct. You can go to a bank early in the process when you're first starting about putting your film together, and they will help you get a laundry list of things that you need to provide them with in order for them to provide you with funding. they do a lot of due diligence. They dot all the I's, they cross all the T's. If you get a contract for pre-sales from Studio Canal in France, they are going to contact Studio Canal. They're going to vet the contract, and if it has to be changed, they're going to request that change, and you're going to have to get Studio Canal to go along with it. So but it is advantageous, because if it turns out that the whole deal falls apart, and uh, the film doesn't make its money back, they're not going to require you to come up with the money personally. The other thing is, the lender will also have some special requirements. Some of them investors may also want as well. And most commonly at projects that are sort of above the $2 million, $3 million ballpark, they're going to ask you to have a completion bond. A completion bond, and we have a resource in the set of resources that actually talks about that. It's an interview with an insurance company, or insurance agent that actually works specifically with the film industry, and he talks about production insurance, which can cover your project. Let's say your lead actor gets sick, and he gets appendicitis, and he's off the job for 6 weeks, and production totally has to stop. If you have the right production insurance, that's covered, and the insurance company will actually cover on the fact that this guy is offline and that you can't shoot your film, and they'll cover the fact that everybody's waiting around. If you have to replace the actor because he dies, they'll cover that. So that's a kind of production insurance. They also have a kind of insurance, the completion bond, which says they will step in. Let's say you're shooting the project and your director turns out to be a total crazy person. Despite the fact he's done well in other projects, he just totally melts down. Everything just falls apart. The completion bond company will literally step in, replace the director, reshoot anything they have to reshoot, and they will complete the project to the bank specifications, and to the specifications that required by the people that did the pre-sales and the investors. They will just finish the job. It's like having a second production company that will step in if you screw up. So banks will a lot of times require you to have exactly the right production insurance, and will require you to have a completion bond. They will want these things because it protects the asset that they're paying to have created. Now, banks will fund, as I mentioned previously, pre-sales, which come from people like Studio Canal or Netflix and so forth. And they will also give you a percentage. If you have rebates coming, they'll give you a percentage of that money as well. The working with a lender, we talked previously, at a previous event, we talked about the fact that in theory, it's possible for you to work with the SBA to get a loan that would allow you to produce a film. But when you, generally speaking, if you talk to, in the interview that we had with Adrian Ward, he says that's not a really good idea because SBA loans are personally secured. So if you can't really default on an SBA loan, even if you will be paying that money back. It is personally secured, whereas traditional entertainment industry bank loans are not personally secured. And if you can qualify, he also mentioned that if you can qualify for an SBA loan, you're going to be able to qualify for the normal entertainment industry loan, which is lower risk. So it's probably a better investment of your time and effort to use a standard bank loan. I just mentioned that because right now the SBA is incredibly active. They're putting out a lot of feelers to all kinds of people, trying to get them to build their business using the support from the SBA. And filmmakers, there's no reason why you shouldn't necessarily have access to those resources, although almost nobody uses SBA loans to fund films. But people do sometimes use SBA loans to do things like build a soundstage, or build if they're a stage rental company, or to build, help purchase a post-production facility, right? So there's a role in the entertainment industry for the SBA, but it's not generally for film funding. Now, we talked about private placement a little bit at the beginning, and I just sort of want to reiterate. Product placement can be really incredibly important to your film. Occasionally, you can get companies to give you some hard cash for letting, in addition to their product, for use in your film. For example, if you're spending $5 million on a film with named talent attached, and you have a way to work in an emblematic computer system and it saves the day, then approaching the computer manufacturer and saying, hey, we're going to have George Clooney in this particular film, or we're going to have Brad Pitt in this particular film, and we need a computer system that's going to actually be used throughout the film. And because of its unique properties, it's going to be really hard to hack, or its privacy features, et cetera. So we can showcase your particular film, your particular product in this particular film. And so would you be interested in, supporting us by giving us a little bit of money? And a lot of these companies, especially if they're really large, they're paying for commercials and ads all the time. So it's not an unheard of pitch for them. Generally speaking, most product placement is used for reducing production costs. So the computer company is going to say, well, what if we just give you 20 computers to use on your set? And you go, well, I don't really want computers. I really want cash. But if you just have computers, I'll take the computers. Or if you go to drink companies, a lot of times they'll want to give you drinks like Coca-Cola, right? So a lot of people get like, so it's strange the kind of things you can get by approaching companies and saying, hey, we're shooting a film, and would you like to, we're looking for product placement support. And they go ahead and they say, well, yeah, put up our energy drink on your set and we'll give you, 20 cases of it, or we'll give you 20 cases of beer or whatever, if you include us in your film. If you need a surgery room, it may be the case that you can get the equipment you need for the scene from the manufacturers of surgical equipment. They may have, they'll have rules and stuff. It's important to understand that if you're going to incorporate branded equipment inside your film, you do actually need to get a release. If I'm showing a certain particular kind of equipment in my film and it's key to the film and I'm highlighting it, in theory, I actually do have to reach out to that company and get permission to use it, because it's just a good, wise move. A lot of people hire folks to do product placement, and there are experts in that particular field. And we did an interview with one named Patty Pelton, and I think it's in your set of resources. I'll go ahead and I'll make sure. And she talks about doing product placement for films. And generally, she comes on board right as you're moving into production, which means you've raised most of your money. And when you've done that, you basically hire her just like you hire anybody else on your crew. And then she helps you reduce your costs by getting product placement support. So if you need a motorcycle, she finds somebody who'll give you the motorcycle for free. If you need a semi-truck, she can find somebody who'll let you have a semi-truck for a couple of days, right? So product placement folks, generally speaking, are working on the cost reduction side, not on the getting cash up front side. To get product placement, generally speaking, you're going to need a pitch book and a person to sort of carry it around and explain the opportunity to people. And the pitch book usually is a series of images that sort of explains the project, explains how much you're spending on it, explains the name talent. You can think of it sort of as a really kind of cut down presentation for your particular project. And it talks about how their particular product will be fitting into this particular film. We talked about merchandising briefly at the beginning, and just to review, when you base your project on people or topics or events or books or stories, existing films, et cetera, that have huge followings, you have a market that you can reach really easily, and that market will buy things before a project is released. And that money is yours, even if the film isn't produced. So if you have something, if you're sure that you've got the next Paranormal Activities, or the next Blair Witch Project, or the next Ouija board movie, you've got the next most famous thing, it really is smart for you to take time and produce a good book. And maybe you make it an illustrated book. I really don't care, but it's really smart to make it a book, make it as pretty and wonderful as humanly possible, and to actively start marketing that book. And you may decide to market it in hardcover. You may decide to market it as paperback. You may decide to market it as an ebook. You may decide to market it as all three. You may decide to take the book and split it up into 3 different books, so you actually have a trilogy. Who cares? The point is taking that intellectual property and turning it into something that you can sell before the film is created lets you do several things. Lets you generate revenue. It lets you prove that a market exists. It lets you create the market if it doesn't exist, and it lets you collect contact information, email addresses for people who will go see your film. You are proving the value of your project, and that is going to, the fact that you've done that work makes your project more interesting to distributors, makes it more interesting to name talent, makes it more interesting to directors, and it means that you're proving that you know you have the audience and you're going to make them happy, right? And it's cheaper than going ahead and producing the film. It's less expensive to do that legwork at the beginning and prove the value and to get revenue from it. It's less expensive to do that than to go ahead and produce the whole $5 million project and find out nobody wants to see the darn thing. Why don't you just go ahead and prove people want to see the darn thing before you actually produce it? There are comic books came before Marvel movies. Snow White, Cinderella, and Pinocchio and Mary Poppins were being incorporated into books and other content long before Disney came along. Winnie the Pooh was a great book before it was a great film. It was the fact they knew it was going to be a successful movie because Winnie the Pooh, the book, was very successful. And you can either purchase something that's already successful or get the rights to it or something, or you can choose to make something that you're passionate about into a successful product or service. Star Wars, upon release, created instant demand for thousands of products, including action figures, books, and housewares. Developing media upon works in the public domain or popular events or people or brands makes merchandising much easier and much more profitable before, during, and after production. If you're planning to produce a project that's got Jack the Ripper, that's a good thing because many people will watch anything that's got Jack the Ripper in it. Nobody owns Jack the Ripper. You don't have to license Jack the Ripper. How many projects have been produced about Treasure Island? Why? Because Treasure Island is in the public domain. So you can take some of you can build your project based upon events and things that have happened in the real world and existing intellectual property. And that's not a bad thing. And then we have a whole workshop in there talking about right of publicity, and that goes into when you're allowed to incorporate historical people and historical people and events and so forth into your work. And there's also, I think there's documentation in there talking about telling true stories, and you should review that as well. Choosing to create your work based on incorporating these kinds of elements, choosing so you can leverage them when you're marketing is very important. Marketing your project, creating merchandise for your project before you go into production is a good way to prove its value. These are things to think about. And if you're going to be producing a $5 million project or a $500,000 project, you might as well give yourself every possible advantage and help yourself ensure your project's going to be a success. I guarantee this, if you can't sell a book, you're going to have a hell of a hard time selling a movie. It's harder. And there's a lot more people involved, and it's a lot more expensive. So experiment with the book thing. Now, I want to sort of talk about how you develop a funding solution for your particular project. You're going to walk through the development process that we've talked about in previous workshops, and to assess the value of the screenplay and the intellectual property as a film, and to consider the value of the merchandising rights before and after production. And I would strongly urge that you actually consider developing multiple projects at different budget levels, so you can choose to produce the one that's right for a particular time, and also so you can compare multiple projects. And hear me out. A lot of times people, and particularly when they're first entering the entertainment industry, and particularly when they've never produced anything before, they'll have a passion project. And sometimes a passion project is really philanthropic. It's a heartfelt something or other about people who are homeless, or it's a piece about people being adopted, or it's who knows what it is. It's something that's very heartfelt. It's very spiritual. It could be the case that it's a really good slasher movie that they think it's just going to be incredibly successful, maybe a little more violent than kind of like Quentin Tarantino. Like, they have a notion of what they want to produce. And as they start trying to develop it, it's slow. and it's hard, and nobody really has interest in it, and it's a grind. When you're developing 3 or 4 projects, if you have 3 or 4 different projects you could choose to move forward with, you'll find that when you start talking about them to people, some of them literally sell themselves. People hear it and they go, yeah, that sounds really amazing. How can I be a part of that? How can I help? And a lot of times the decision isn't really an economic one. They just plain like it better. They just do plain like it better. For example, a lot of people would rather have a nice cozy mystery with a happy ending, or a nice, a nice science fiction story that's got some innovative ideas in it, than something that is really heavy, just because it's harder to sell heavy things. It's harder to sell it. People, it just becomes, if you have a strict drama that doesn't have any thriller aspects, it's harder to sell than a drama that does have thriller components to it. And you don't see that until you're actually developing multiple projects. You don't see how some things are easier to sell than others. Now, I've already recommended that nobody start producing a film at the $500 to $5 million level until they produce lower cost films and low, because it just doesn't make sense to. You need to be able to practice on something easy before diving into something big. But even after you've produced a few little films and it's gone easy and it's, you've been able to sell them, it really does make sense to start thinking about 3 or 4 projects you could do, seeing how people respond to them, and choosing the one that sort of gains momentum all by itself. You want a project that has a life of its own. You have to remember that serious investors are assessing your project's return on investment against other investments. So when you're on Regulation CF, one of the best things about doing a Regulation CF campaign is if you're doing it right and you're running advertisements and you're getting people that care about the particular topic, like it's about Ouija boards, and you're advertising it to people that love Ouija boards and paranormal activity. A lot of those people aren't investors. They just want to support the project, right? They just want to support the project. They don't really care if they get their money back. You're going to give them their money back, but they don't really care. What they do care the most about is the fact that if they invest in your project, you're going to send them, if they invest $1,000 in your project, you're going to invite them to the red carpet opening in Los Angeles, right? They care about that. They care about the perks that go along with a Regulation CF investment. They care about that kind of thing. When you're working with serious investors, however, and particularly, like people that are putting money, $10,000, $20,000, $100,000, $200,000 in, those people are saying, look, I could put my money into this real estate investment. I could put my money into this solar investment. I can put my money into this film project. And they're assessing what you're offering them in return for their investment against what those people are offering. So if they put their money in a bank, they might get 2% interest if they were really lucky, and they'll have no risk. If they decide to put it into an index fund, they might be the case that they could, in a good year, they might earn 4%, but relatively low risk, because in order for the index fund to go bad, the whole market would have to crash. And that's probably not going to happen. It has happened recently, and I wouldn't say it never happens, but it doesn't happen often. So it's relatively, and it usually recovers. So, sooner or later, maybe you get back on track. But when they're putting money into your project, you're relatively high risk compared to that. And they kind of need to see a bigger return. So they might need you to promise them a 20% return on investment if the project is successful, which means that you don't just pay them their money back, you pay them 20% extra. And then after that, you split the proceeds with them 50-50, or 60% to you and 40% to them. So you have to compensate them more than other investments, because you're more risky than other investments. And that, if you've ever wondered, like, how much do investors expect, that's why I'm mentioning this. You have to promise them. I mentioned 20% because I've known many film projects that offered investors a 20% royalty, like a 20% premium return. So they got their money back plus 20%, and they got paid right after the bank. First, the bank gets its money back, and then the investors get their money back, and they get their money back plus 20% of their investment as well. So if they put in 100,000, they get 120,000 back. There In addition to that, there'll be things that the investor and or the bank require to make your project less risky. And that can include a completion bond. It could include a good cast. It could include a really good crew. It could include, they want to see good film analytics and financial forecasts. All of those things make them think, okay, this project is more likely to be successful. And so I'll put money into it. It's that you have to prove that your project has a high probability of being finished and making its money back, in addition to offering them a premium return. Lenders want to take no risk at all. Lenders are not making an investment. Lenders are lending against assets. So pre-sales, a contract for pre-sales is an asset. A contract with the state government for rebates or incentives is a contract, and they're lending against that. They're charging less for their money because of that. So if you have a choice between, if somebody will give you a loan versus somebody's going to give you investment, generally speaking, the loan's a better deal for you, especially because specifically it's a lower interest rate it's a lower cost to you in terms of what you have to pay. And again, we just mentioned the fact that most of them are not personally secured. Most film loans are not personally secured. The loan officer's job is to make it so the bank really can't lose money. That's their whole job. So you're going to jump through a bunch of hoops, but jumping through those hoops will actually make it more likely. They're helping you actually make your film more likely to be successful because that's actually their job. Some investors we just mentioned, like fans investing in a Regulation CF project or family or friends, are really just putting money into a project to support the project or to support you. They'll put money into the project without any real hope of return. Ideally, one likes it when that comes, when somebody puts money into a Regulation CF campaign, they're an investor and you have to treat them like an investor. And Regulation CF lets you give them perks, and it may be the perks they're more interested in, but you still have to make sure that they come through. You come through on the promises that you've made to that particular set of investors. When family and friends are giving you money, like your dad says, I really think it's cool you're trying to produce films, and I'm going to give you $10,000 to help out, and that's just a gift. And family and friends sometimes will support you in that way. Customers buying merchandise give you money you can use to fund your film, and you don't owe them anything. So you spend $10,000 or $10,000, and that's a lot of money, taking your Ouija screenplay. Let's say, for example, you said, I want to do 3 horror films based upon the Ouija board, Ouija 1, Ouija 2, and Ouija 3. And I guess you can't really call them Ouija because I think that's a brand name. So you probably call it Spirit Board 1, Spirit Board 2, and Spirit Board 3. And you basically create 3 books: Spirit Board 1, Spirit Board 2, Spirit Board 3. Maybe you even make them illustrated books, so you can have hardcover illustrated books with great illustrations. You spend $10,000 to create these books, and you market them aggressively. And on each one it says, soon to be a feature film. We'll, gonna basically start pushing those out into the marketplace. All the money you get back from that belongs to you. You could choose to put it into your film. You could choose not to put it into your film. It belongs to you. All the contact information that you get when you're promoting the book, like if you say, sign up here and we'll send you a free sample, or, the first 3 chapters, all of that stuff, all those email addresses belong to you. So it's kind of the best way for you to raise money because you get the money up front and you have a lot of freedom with what you do with it. And you also get a lot of other assets as well. You get name recognition, and you get contact information. And you may find out, look, if I spend 30 cents running ads, I get people I could spend 30 cents and I end up getting, for every 30 cents I spend, I end up getting somebody's name on my email list because they download a free sample. And once I have that, every out of every 10 I get, one of them decides to buy the first book, and of the people that buy the first book, the 50% of them go on to buy the other 2 books. So when I spend 30 cents, I have like a 10% possibility that somebody's going to end up spending $20, so that turns out to be really very profitable and very scalable. And people do that kind of thing on a regular basis. People make money off of selling books all of the time, and they make money. A lot of those books, as you know, if you look on donedealpro.com, a lot of those books actually get turned into films because producers license them. So you can create your own intellectual property that you want to be able to fund and turn into films. We talked about the fact that people can invest time into your project in return for a percentage of the back end. You want to make sure that you don't take advantage of that opportunity if it comes with attaching somebody to your project who's substandard in doing their job. You don't want to take somebody who is not a line producer, call him a line producer just because he's willing to work for cheap. Or because he's willing to put $10,000 into your project. Because again, if they screw up or they're not competent, it actually is going to derail your project, and that's going to be a very expensive mistake. Every producer puts in the first few dollars into a project, but you are the only one putting money. If you're the only one putting money into a project, that's a good indication that your project doesn't have legs. It's not strong enough. It's one of the reasons I mentioned that it does make sense for you to seriously contemplate, look, I can do the 3 Ouija board project. I could do the 3 military vet project. I could do the 3 haunted mill films, or I could do. I could plan to do something about a demon ghost ship. So those are the 3 projects I'm going to do. I'm going to think about all 3 of those projects. And I'm going to start thinking about, what intellectual property, how would the funding work? And you don't spend a lot of money on any of them, but you start talking to people about them and you see what kind of heat they develop and how much, and you start thinking about what the costs are going to be. And you start talking about getting film analytics done. One of the things people we interviewed was Bruce Nash from Nash Information Systems. And he can do, last time I checked, for $500 or $1,000, he can do film analytics for a particular film. So you can start getting a financial forecast for how much a film might be worth at the box office relatively cost effectively. So doing that for multiple films really makes sense when you're trying to find the one that you think is going to be the most profitable. Just like an investor, you should determine how you spend your time and money based upon what's more likely to pay off the highest value. And you certainly don't want to be, again, you really don't want to be the only one putting money into your project. If you're spending $10,000, $15,000, $30,000, $100,000, $200,000 on your project and you're the only one putting money in, that's a very bad sign. And that's why you hear a lot of people say, don't put money into your own projects. They don't mean don't put nickels and dimes in. What they mean is if your project isn't strong enough to get support from other people, it's not going to be able to go the distance and generate a lot of revenue. It's just you need to be able to have something people are willing to support you in creating. A good line producer with profitable credits for films in the same budget level is key to developing projects that need to rely on state film incentives and completion bonds and loans. A good line producer is critical. And we talked previously about how to find good line producers and about the fact that you should interview 5 line producers who have similar credits to the project that you're currently creating, and at least 5, and then you should choose the best among them. You need to always make sure that you interview 5 candidates for any key position, so you don't just buy the first person that you like. A good producer's rep or sales agent who's got success selling, doing pre-sales for projects like yours, and has done lots of pre-sales for lots of other projects, is really key for proving to lenders and to investors that your film is actually going to make money. And they kind of prove that the film analytics and financial forecasts that you've done are accurate. A director, key cast, key crew with profitable films in the same genre that you're producing in and at the same budget level helps investors, lenders, and distributors believe audiences are going to pay to see your film and that they'll watch your film on streaming services. Now, the key thing to understand is that all these people, by joining onto your project, are endorsing you, and they're adding to the perceived value of your project. and they're adding to the probability of your success. When you attach bad people in a key role, it destroys your credibility and it makes funding much harder. So choosing an actor that isn't popular anymore or that nobody knows to play a key role is discrediting to you. Attaching a director who doesn't have credits in your genre or who has never worked at your budget level before destroys your credibility. There's a million different ways to destroy your credibility. And when you do that, it makes your project much harder to produce. The key people, one of the reasons is because when you attach people in these key roles and they're really good at their jobs, they really care about their reputation. They do care about the scripts that they produce. They do care about your ability to pay them. They do care about your credits and the credits that you're creating. And they do care about your ability to make and keep promises. They care about your ability to run a company legally and safely and well. The fact that they care about the project and the fact that they hold you to account and the fact that they hold one another to account ensures that the project comes together. It's the people that are, and the fact that they will come through on your particular project, the fact that their reputation is so important to them that they will guarantee that the project is going to be successful as long as you pay them. That's what brings a lot of credibility to your project. So you can't attach bad people to a project and expect it to fund easily. You have to develop things by the book in order to ensure that the project is strong enough to be able to gain the support that it needs from directors, cast, crew, line producers, sales reps, lenders, and investors, right? So if you've known a lot of different people who've tried to produce films at this budget level and they've spent 3, 4, 5, 7 years and lots of money not being successful, that's why. It's because they didn't go through the development process for those particular projects. And it has translated into a project that just will not work. It's like, a table that only has 2 legs. It doesn't have the pieces it needs in order to be successful. When people are looking at your project as investors or as lenders or, investors or lenders, or even people that are just thinking about working with you to produce something, they have a set of calculations that they do. They think about what's the total amount of money that this thing could possibly make in 3 years? Like, what's the total revenue projected to be? And then they think about, well, what's the cost of producing this project? And then they look at the probability of success. So they look at you, they look at the development that you've done, they look at the team you've put together, and they go, you know what? This project is so strong that I think this thing has a 90% chance of success. So I think, if I think it's possible that this thing really may be very successful. They factor that into how much the project is really going to be worth in about 3 years, right? So you may be spending, you may be saying, okay, look, my financial forecasts say this film's going to be worth $9 million. And it's going to cost us $4 million to produce. And people go, okay, so that's a $5 million profit. And when you're thinking to yourself, well, okay, this is a $5 million profit. That's not so bad. And you know what they're thinking? They're thinking, yeah, but based upon what I've seen of your project and then based on how you do business, I think there's only a 50% chance you'll make it. And that means that really your project is only going to, the real value of your project is only going to be about 2.5 million in the best case scenario. Because I know the $4 million is going to, even if you make, there's only a 50% chance that you're going to make $5 million. So really the value is only going to be $2.5 million. That's how much I really trust that this project is going to be worth in 3 years. And that means I don't want to do it. It's just not worth it to me. Right? So that distrust factor that people have comes from, it's something you have to really keep in mind. Like, you have to really look at your credits and you look and make sure that your development is correct. And you've got the film analytics and financial forecasts and pre-sales and the key cast and the key crew and all of these things to prove your credibility so that number actually is a big number. You want to make it so people look at it and go, yep, this project is, when George Clooney's doing a film, because he is a very successful actor producer, people look at it and go, you know what? I got to say, there's at least a 90% chance this thing's going to be really successful. And because his track record is so good, and he's had so much success in the past, and because he always does such great development, people go, yeah, I believe that guy. I'm going to put money into his projects because he tends to come through. So he gets a lot more support um, from the very beginning because people find him very credible. You need to make sure that you're credible. And I think a lot of times when producers are trying to put together funding, they don't realize their credibility is the thing that's actually holding them back. They say, I don't understand why people aren't investing this in my project. I know my forecasts say I'm going to make $15,000 or $50,000 from this $5 million investment. And they're just looking at all the pieces that you've put together, and they're saying, yeah, but there's only a 10% chance that's going to happen based upon what I can see here. So consciously understand that distrust factor. And also, when you're thinking about working with other people's projects, if you're a writer and you're attending this event because you're thinking, I want to find a producer to help produce my film, or the producers approach me and they're wanting me to give them a very low cost option, take a look at the development that they've done, take a look at their credits, find out what the development process is going to be, because you're going to be putting your script in their hands. And if they're not going to be paying you a lot of money up front, then and they're going to be tying up your script for 2 to 3 years. That's a big investment on your part. And you have a right to say, I just don't have a lot of trust that he's going to actually come through with a film. And, the $1,000 he wants me to give me for an option just isn't worth it to me. I'd rather just go ahead and find somebody better. So I wanted to make sure that I highlighted this trust issue and why development and putting the right pieces together, how that directly impacts how investors and lenders and everybody else sort of treats you when you're in the seeking support. As we've mentioned previously, I'm going to stop for questions in a minute, but I wanted to mention that we have a whole bunch of resources that come with this particular event, and they dive deep on stuff like how to sell your film rights and how to hire people legally, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's additional materials that you really do sort of have to take a look at, and they come, if they are available to you. If you can't find them, go ahead and send me an email at nancy@nancyfultonmeetups.com. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the questions. So, right. So Robin says, everything that I'm presenting tonight is cumulative and is based upon the information that I've presented previously in which is available to you in the set of resources. So if you take a look at the set of resources, you'll find something that talks about big budget film development and big budget strategies. Go ahead and watch those 2 events, and you will find that information. This film funding event does in fact build on that, and it's necessary that it do that. You cannot get funding unless you do correct development. So that's why we covered development as a topic in and of itself, and we dive very deep on that in previously. Step-by-step instructions on development. You're going to go ahead and take a look at that set of resources, and then the funding stuff will make complete sense if you find it the least bit confusing now. Hopefully you won't, because I think we did sort of review it here, but if you did, you can go check out those resources and then send me an email. I'm always around. Let's see. So James asked, how can you have 20% development costs in place when you haven't raised the total budget, and what happens if the project falls over at this stage? All right, so here's the truth, and it's an ugly truth, but I shall tell it to you now. Film is a rich man's game. It is a rich man's game. If you are a wealthy person and you happen to be able to front that 20%, producing a film is very easy for you. Now, here we live in Hollywood. Many of us know that we can all go back and look through history. We've known rich playboys who decided to put money into films, and they have gone on to produce content. Some of those films didn't do very well. A lot of them didn't do very well, but did the film get made? Yep. Did people put in investment money into it? Did they get loans? Yep. Why? Because they had the 20%. So if you don't have the 20%, you have to figure out how to get it. That's why I talked about doing the merchandising play. That's why I talked about we talked about Kickstarter and Indiegogo. What's how we talked about, we talked about several different ways that people put together that 20%. But yes, you have to have that 20%. If you don't have that 20%, then switch gears and go produce a lower cost project. Go create a $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 project that you can afford to produce and figure out a way to sell it. If you can't sell projects at a lower budget level, if you can't take film content and turn it into content that you can sell, you have a problem, generally speaking, right? It's nobody has a sort of a default right to be able to start producing $500,000 or up to $5 million films as their first project. That's just not a thing. You will start with a lower price project and you will make that project successful, and you may do it 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then you will generate revenue that you can use to fund larger projects. That's a very common way for producers to get the 20% that they need. They do lower cost projects that make money. So Ren asks, what companies do you know that do entertainment loans? Ren, if you take a look at the resources that come with this particular event, you'll find Adrian Barnes, and he works with I forget the name of the banks, and I don't want to say it wrong, but it's in the set of resources. Is it listed here? Hold on. I'm not sure it's listed here, but his name is Adrian Ward. Go ahead and look him up. We did an interview with him. He's one of the leading entertainment industry bankers, and he specifically, he likes hearing from new producers. Where would I find help? Where would I find a company to help with product placement? It's a tricky business, and usually you don't start looking for them. If you start producing your project when you're working with line producers and a whole bunch of other people, they'll recommend folks. There's a woman called Patty Pelton that I interviewed, and I'll make sure that her. If you take a look at as a VIP subscriber, if you take a look at the resources that are available to you, you have the Patty Pelton interview, I believe. And I'll make sure that it's available for people that signed up just for this particular event as well. But she's one person. But usually what happens is you start looking for product placement sort of as you roll into pre-production, and you have a director and you have a bunch of other people that are working with you, and they have product placement people who are experienced in doing this particular job. Theoretically, you could probably advertise for them. You could place an ad on Craigslist. You find crazy people on Craigslist. You do all kinds of things. I found Emmy award-winning producers on Craigslist. So you never know, but that's one place to start. You can email me if you have more questions, but you don't usually need those folks until you have moved into the part where you're actually in active pre-production and you have the budget required to pay them. And that might cost you $4,000 a week, because they, sometimes they can save on a $5 million project, they can save you $500,000. I mean, they're good deal makers, and they can find a lot of the stuff that you need for your project, locations and equipment, like that you would have to otherwise pay for free. So they're pretty wonderful. Let me go check the other stuff. You're going to work with an attorney to set up the company that you put money into when you're producing a film. When you set up an LLC, usually people will set up an LLC, and that'll be the vehicle or the company that actually produces the film. And when you talk to your attorney, he'll talk about the fact that, you'll address with him things that you have to file with the state of California to create an LLC. And also he'll talk, you'll talk to an accountant who'll talk about the tax obligations that you have. And those tax obligations start before production during the fundraising side and go all the way to the end of the project when you've actually received a whole bunch of money and you're dishing out the profits to people. You have to work with an attorney when you're setting up your LLC, and you have to work, or in theory, you could produce it with a corporation or whatever, because how you set up your LLC is really, really, really important to limiting your risk and to making sure that if things go wrong, that you have the maximum protection possible for your personal assets. It's very, very important that you work with an attorney. Do not just set up any old company to uh, to produce your project. There are reasons why you want to work with an attorney to make sure that you create exactly the right vehicle for your particular project, that your operating agreement and all those other things are completely in line with limiting your risk and liability, and to making sure that if there's a problem or things go badly during production, you can maintain and control. Remember that you're also going to be working with an attorney to create contracts to hire people so that you have the ability to fire them. That's particularly important if you're going to be bringing people on board as co-producers, or if you're going to be bringing people on board in key roles, because you need to be, if someone's becoming a problem and they're not going to be able to fulfill their role for you, or they're not meeting your requirements, you need to be able to replace them. And once you're a company and you've hired somebody, you're subject to California labor laws, and there's rules about how they have to be treated. So working with an attorney, in setting up your company, hiring people, and funding operations, all of those kinds of things are very important. Um, Sometimes when you interview attorneys just like you interview entertainment attorneys, just like you interview anybody else, and make sure that you check their credits, make sure that you ensure that they're, you know, a lot of people who say they're attorneys, when you actually look them up, they're not necessarily in good standing with the state of California. You want somebody who doesn't have complaints against them, and you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who's very responsive, because you're going to be turning to your attorney day in and day out as you produce projects. One reason to start by producing small projects first is because you can develop a relationship with an attorney or multiple attorneys as you're producing the smaller projects. And then when you move up to bigger projects, you know that you can rely on them. And you have developed a relationship with them. Also, a lot of the stuff that you need to know for larger projects, you'll have learned by producing smaller projects. So people kind of turn up their nose at doing. I'm not really so much a fan of short films. I don't hate them. I just don't. I'd rather produce something that's going to make money. So, but I think producing ultra low cost feature films, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000, I think is like just the best possible practice for producing larger films and preparation for producing those films. And really, it's easier and it's faster and it's cheaper, right? It's all, if you like to produce, if you want to produce, it's easier to pick something you can shoot in one location and just go ahead and shoot it than it is, with a small cast, et cetera. It's much easier to do that than it is to do a larger project. And so if you haven't done that first, give it a shot. It's a good learning curve. It's not a step back. It's just common sense, and it's fun. It's more fun. The other thing I'd mention is there's a lot of, if you think about it, you only need 90 good minutes. So there have been people, I remember just, I met somebody, and he really specialized in like $20,000 films, right? And so I wanted to find out what he produced. So I went around, got his name, I went around and looked him up, and he produced $20,000 films, and like one of them was set on an airplane. So he rented like an airplane set, and it was a really cheap, it was clear that he did shoot it over the course of less than a week. And it was basically about a pilot who had killed a woman, and he had to get rid of the body. So he put it into a suitcase, and the suitcase got loaded onto the plane. And then she started haunting the plane on the stormy flight. It was actually a pretty good show, because like they had to solve the mystery just right there in the room, and it's like, why is she haunting us, and why are the lights going out, and are we all going to die? I mean, it's pretty good, and I think about it and I go, that's a good story, and it's not expensive. And it made money. Like, I think it didn't really have superstars, but it had a couple of recognizable people, and they got to play interesting roles. It's not a bad thing. So seriously, don't be afraid of like investing in those small projects. They can pay off.